So at this stage we've got the chains off, we've got our bolts loosened on our top sprocket, our bottom sprocket. We can probably try and pull that sprocket off. There's a little key that holds that in place. Get the reel out and get that off to be sharpened or painted or whatever we want to do with it. It would seem logical to try and take these guys off next. There's some little nuts and bolts that hold them on. We'll leave them for now. My main priority is getting the clutch off so I can pull the engine off and measure that shaft. Just before I do anything else, I'm going to get rid of this grass deflector. Try and loosen off these two sort of thumb screws anyway, and just get that out of the way. That one's on pretty tight. The left one, not so much. Alright, I was able to get my little adjustable spanner on there to loosen that off. We should be able to just back these off. The deflector clamp assembly is two pieces, so there's these two little bits that go in from the top, and there's the little arms on the deflector itself, and then there's a little piece of metal underneath that holds everything together. And that's one of the, if you can see that, it's one of the little bottom parts of the clamp from this side. Bottom of the deflector has two little clips that clip onto the top of the sole plate, so they're a little bit tricky, but they should just lift out, assuming you don't have a clamp in the way. And that just comes out like so. You can see over here the two little clips I was talking about. So there's a couple of different schools of thoughts as to how to get this top assembly off. You can either loosen the four nuts that hold the engine on and just try and slide the whole thing off. A lot of the time it might be easiest to undo the three bolts and nuts that hold the two clutch halves together and then try and pull it apart. In the first case, you're assuming that the engine shaft is just going to slide out from inside of this half of the clutch after you've removed the cotter pin or the grub screws, and that's not often the case. Quite often it's a very tight fit. So looking at this engine, there's a hole for a cotter pin there, but no cotter pin inside of it. And there's also a hole for a missing grub screw there, and another grub screw here. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull that grub screw off and loosen off the four engine bolts and see what happens. I was saying earlier about making sure that all your nuts and bolts are tight. This is why. This one's quite loose. I mean, it's probably just on there finger tight, so if that came loose and ended up in your cutter, that probably wouldn't be a very good thing at all. So you'd probably end up with a damaged blade or two and a bit of cost to repair that. So that's loose. There's nothing else holding this clutch half in place. It doesn't rotate freely. There's a bit of play in there with the engine itself, I believe, but it'll be interesting to see if there's a key holding that on there. Alright, so our deflector's out of the way. We've got chains off the top sprocket and our grub screws and whatnot out of the way there. Next thing to do is I'm going to start by loosening off these four bolts, the two at the front and two at the back, that hold the engine in place. They're just threaded straight into the deck of the mower itself. This is a 1/2 inch spanner that I'm using for these bolts. These little ring spanners are kind of handy. You can get the ratcheting kind that are even handier, but these will do the trick. With some of the engine housing on here and whatnot, it's difficult to get a socket around some of these guys. And then we have our four screws, a little washer, another little spring washer I think you call it, and then the bolt itself. At this time I can see how much this is going to move. Look at that. Sliding right out of there, you can see the key in the keyway and the clutch as well, so that's just gonna keep coming right on out of there. Alright, so this engine's slid off of here quite easily in this case. The last one I ended up having to separate the two halves of the clutch and sort of wiggled this half off, just sort of wiggle until it came off, slowly but surely in the end. So if we pull this back a little bit further, we'll have a look at the shaft itself. So that's the key that slots into the keyway on the shaft, and there's a corresponding slot in the clutch half as well for that to mate into. If we look at this shaft, the keyway itself, it's got a little extra washer on there. The shaft itself is looking, sorry, the keyway itself is looking alright. The shaft's just taken a bit of abuse from the little grub screws on the clutch half. So this screw's been bearing down on the side of that shaft. You can see there's a little divot at the end of that screw, and it mates quite well into that little bit of guff on that shaft there. You can see it a bit better now there. And it looks like there's another little dent over here, but I sort of wonder if there's only been ever the one grub screw in there and the key holding this together. Normally you'd have the cotter pin sort of sitting through the large hole on that clutch half and sort of wrapping itself around that shaft to immobilize the clutch half against the shaft. So anyway, get that out of the way. So I want to get a measure on this shaft so that I can replace this engine. That shaft mates to the half of the clutch that fits on there, and they come in either 5/8 of an inch or 3/4 of an inch. So you need to know the diameter of that shaft before you can replace it, because you can buy an engine that's either 5/8 or 3/4. So I've got my digital dial calipers. They're pretty cheap, these things. Kind of worth having. You can switch between metric and inches as well. So I'm just going to throw that on there. We'll see what it comes up with. Alright, so if you can see that, that's saying 5/8 of an inch. So I know that shaft is a 5/8 shaft, and that's what I need to buy to replace this engine.